Okay, so are you ready for another deep dive? Today we're going way back to the Roman Empire to explore this really interesting sermon called Acts 29.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one.
It's all about what happened after the book of Acts ends in the Bible.
Hmm.
Like there's this unwritten chapter, just waiting to be lived out.
Yeah, it is a pretty fascinating concept,
It uses that very end of Acts as like a jumping off point.
right? Where Paul is under house arrest in Rome,
Right. But he's still preaching even while he's stuck there.
which, I mean, when you think about it, is a pretty interesting situation.
It is.
A lot of symbolism there. I
Definitely.
mean, this is Paul, once a persecutor of Christians,
Right, right.
now imprisoned for his faith.
Yeah, but his spirit isn't broken.
Not at all.
He's still out there spreading the gospel.
Exactly.
But for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the Bible, can you give us a little background on who Paul was and why he was so important? Like, what made this guy such a big deal?
Well, so Paul, he was originally known as Saul, and he was actually out there persecuting those early Christians before having a pretty dramatic conversion experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And that changed everything.
Yeah, so like a total 180.
Yeah. And he became this like tireless missionary spreading the gospel, all throughout the Roman Empire.
Wow, so he really got around.
He did. And a lot of his letters actually became really foundational texts for Christian theology.
Okay, so his writings had a lasting impact.
A huge impact. Many of them are actually in the New Testament.
Oh, wow, I see.
Yeah. So that's how important he was.
Wow, okay, so big deal, for sure.
For sure.
But the book of Acts tells the story of the early church, right?
Yeah.
So why does it just end with Paul, stuck in Rome?
Well, almost like they left it as an open ending,
Oh, interesting.
leaving us to wonder, like, what happened next.
Okay, I see.
And that's what makes this whole Acts 29 idea so interesting. Because, it challenges us to think about how the story continues.
Right, not just back then, but like even now.
It's not just in, like, historical terms, but, like, how it plays out in our own lives.
I love that. Okay, so let's get back to Paul under house arrest.
Yeah.
Because the sermon makes this point that this situation, while it seems like a setback, actually had some unexpected advantages for spreading Christianity.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive at first.
It is.
But when you think about it, during his travels, Paul faced a ton of danger.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Like constant danger, shipwrecks, beatings, you name it.
Wow.
He was even imprisoned in other cities, too.
Oh, wow.
But being under Roman guard in Rome, well, that actually gave him a level of safety and stability that he just hadn't had before.
That makes sense. He didn't have to worry about getting attacked or thrown in jail every other week.
Yeah, exactly.
But how did that help him spread the gospel?
Well, it freed him up to focus.
Okay.
He could focus entirely on his ministry, preach and teach without the constant threat of persecution, hanging over his head.
So instead of running all over the place, dodging angry mobs, he could actually, settle in and have more in-depth conversations.
Exactly. And it allowed him to connect with a much wider audience.
Yeah, because his home basically became this hub of activity, right?
Yeah, with people from all walks of life.
So it wasn't just the same people all the time.
Nope. Guards, officials, visitors, all coming and going.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like his imprisonment amplified his message.
Exactly, instead of silencing him.
That is fascinating.
It really is.
And, the sermon also mentions that his basic needs were taken care of during this time.
Oh, yeah?
Like, he didn't even have to worry about food or shelter.
Nope.
It's almost like a modern-day scholarship,
It is, isn't it?
where someone's essential needs are met so they can just focus on their research.
Right, exactly. Like in Paul's case, it was a scholarship for ministry.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we've got safety, stability, support, but there's one more thing that the sermon highlights.
What's that?
Time.
Ah, yes. Time is key.
Because without the need to travel constantly or earn a living, Paul had the freedom to do something else.
Right.
Right? And what he produced during this time became so important.
Hugely influential.
Like letters to the Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians.
Exactly. Some of the most influential texts in Christian history.
And they were written from prison.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It makes you wonder what would have happened if Paul had never been in prison.
Right. Would Christianity have developed the same way?
Really makes you think.
It does, and it kind of speaks to this broader point that this sermon makes.
Okay.
That sometimes what seems like a setback, a limitation, can actually become a catalyst for something much greater.
Okay, so we've established that Paul's imprisonment had some surprising benefits.
We have.
But how does the sermon connect all of this back to Acts 29?
Well, it uses Paul's situation as a springboard
Okay.
to explore this idea that the story of Christianity didn't end with the book of Acts.
Okay.
It's a story that continues to unfold in every generation through the lives of, everyday believers.
Oh, I like that.
We're all called to write our own Acts 29.
So it's not just about historical events. It's about our own journeys of faith.
Exactly.
But how does that work?
Well, think about it. The sermon shows how Paul's imprisonment, even though it was really challenging, actually gave him some really unique opportunities.
To spread the gospel.
Right? Opportunities he might not have had otherwise.
Hmm.
And in the same way, our own challenges, limitations, even our setbacks,
Yeah.
they can become platforms for growth impact and ultimately for writing our own chapter in this ongoing story of faith.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is, isn't it?
So it's not just about what happened to Paul. It's about what we can learn from him and apply to our own lives.
Exactly. The sermon is using Paul's story as a lens to examine our own callings or challenges and really our own potential to make a difference in the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it all fits together, but before we dive into how this Acts 29 concept has played out throughout history, I want to go back to Paul's message for a second.
Okay.
Because the sermon actually talks about the content of what he was preaching in Rome,
It does.
and it draws specifically on the account in the book of Acts. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, so when Paul was addressing this group of Jewish leaders in Rome,
Oh, okay.
he was really trying to clear up any misconceptions they might have had about him and his teachings.
Makes sense. I mean, they might not have been too happy with him.
Exactly. And he emphasized that he hadn't rejected his Jewish heritage or anything like that,
Okay.
but that he was actually proclaiming, their fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
So he was trying to build bridges even with those who might have seen him as, a traitor.
Right, exactly. And he also addressed the fact that, he'd been handed over to the Romans by his fellow Jews,
Oh, wow.
but that he had been found innocent of any crimes worthy of death.
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems like he wanted to set the record straight,
Yeah.
dispel any rumors that might have been circulating about him.
Okay, and the sermon mentions that he also talked about his appeal to Caesar,
He did.
which I find really intriguing. Why was that such a big deal?
Well, because some people saw it as this act of betrayal against his own people. But Paul explained that it wasn't an attempt to accuse them or anything like that,
Okay,
but a necessary step, to make sure he got a fair hearing.
that makes sense.
And he wanted to be clear that his mission wasn't about condemnation,
Right.
but about proclaiming God's salvation.
So he wasn't trying to stir up trouble?
Not at all.
He genuinely wanted to share this message of hope and forgiveness that he found in Jesus.
Exactly. And that commitment to truth and reconciliation,
Yeah.
even when he was facing opposition.
Yeah.
It's something the sermon really holds up as an example for us to follow as we write our own Acts 29.
That's a great point. It's not always about being right,
No, it's
It's
not.
about being faithful to your calling even when it's hard and trusting that God's going to use your efforts,
Exactly.
even in unexpected ways.
Right.
But Paul's message wasn't always met with open arms, right?
That's true.
The sermon mentions that even though he presented the gospel clearly and with compassion,
Uh-huh.
the response was mixed.
Yeah. Some were persuaded, but others remained skeptical.
So it wasn't an instant success.
No. And this actually led to a pretty interesting moment.
What happened?
Well, Paul, he was reflecting on this divided response.
Okay.
And he drew this really poignant parallel to his own past
Oh, wow.
as, a persecutor of Christians.
It's like he understood what it was like to be on the other side.
Right. And it shows that he really understood how complex faith is.
Yeah. And how hard it can be to change your beliefs.
Exactly. And it also highlights this reality that even the most compelling message won't always be met with, universal acceptance.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that you can plant seeds, but you can't force them to grow.
Exactly.
But Paul doesn't give up, does he?
Nope, not at all.
Even though some people reject him.
Uh-huh.
What does he do?
Well, the sermon describes how he ends his message with this powerful statement.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, he takes it for the book of Isaiah.
Oh, wow.
It's a prophecy about people who, even though they see and hear God's message,
Yeah.
they remain hardened in their hearts,
Wow.
unable to understand.
Okay, so even when confronted with truth, some people just choose to reject it.
It's a tough pill to swallow, I know.
It is. It makes you wonder why even bother,
That's what I mean.
If some people are just going to reject the message no matter what, why even try?
That's a valid question, and I think that's where the sermon really shines.
Hmm.
It doesn't shy away from these tough questions.
Okay.
It actually uses them to point us toward a deeper understanding of God's grace and how it works.
Okay. I'm intrigued. So how does the sermon address this tension, between rejection and hope?
Well, Paul ends his message with this bold declaration.
What does he say?
He says that since the Jewish people had largely rejected this message of salvation,
Right.
God would now extend that offer of grace to the Gentiles,
To everyone.
to all the nations of the world.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It marks a pivotal moment in the story of Christianity.
Right, where the message of salvation expands beyond just one group of people.
Exactly. And the sermon emphasizes that this wasn't like a plan B,
Uh-huh.
It was always part of God's plan to redeem all of humanity.
So even in the face of rejection, God's purposes are still being fulfilled.
Exactly. Even if they take unexpected turns.
I see. And that theme of unexpected turns of limitations becoming opportunities.
Yes,
That's at the heart of Acts 29.
it is.
The sermon uses Paul's story to show how God can use even the most challenging circumstances for good.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the context of Paul's imprisonment and the content of his message.
We have.
But I'm really curious to hear how the sermon connects all of this to this idea of Acts 29 throughout history.
Okay.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. The sermon highlights how Paul's story is just one example of how this concept is played out throughout the history of Christianity.
Okay, so it's a story that's still unfolding.
Exactly. In every generation.
So it's not just about what happened in the past, it's about what's happening right now in our own lives.
Exactly. The sermon presents this idea that we're all called to write our own Acts 29.
I like that.
We all face our own challenges,
Yeah.
and we all contribute to this ongoing story of faith.
And the sermon uses some pretty compelling examples to make this point.
It does.
So who are some of the Acts 29 characters from history?
Well, it starts by looking at the Protestant Reformation,
Okay.
which was, a period of huge change in the 16th century.
Yeah. That really reshaped Christianity.
It did, and it frames key figures like Martin Luther, John Calvin Ulrich Zwingli as writing their own Acts 29.
Wow. Okay, so these were people who stood up to the church.
They did.
They risked their lives for their beliefs.
They did.
And they sparked a movement that changed history.
Yes.
But how does the sermon connect their actions to Acts 29?
Well, it points out that these reformers, much like Paul,
Mhm.
they faced intense opposition, even persecution.
Yeah.
I mean, they were threatened with excommunication, imprisonment, even death.
Wow.
But their commitment to truth, their willingness to challenge the status quo and their faith,
Yeah.
well, that helped spark a movement that swept across Europe and transformed the Christian world.
So their limitations, their struggles actually became a catalyst for change.
Exactly. And their Acts 29 wasn't just about personal piety either.
Okay.
It was about reforming the church, making it more accessible to ordinary people,
Right.
reclaiming that core message of the gospel.
So it's not about trying to be the next Martin Luther or John Calvin.
No, it's not.
It's about finding our own way to contribute to the story of faith.
Exactly. And the sermon makes it clear that this Acts 29 concept,
Yeah.
it doesn't just apply to reformers or theologians.
Okay.
It also applies to those who, share the gospel with people who haven't heard it yet.
You mean like missionaries?
Exactly. The sermon talks about individuals like Dwight L. Moody, Charles Finney, Charles Spurgeon,
Okay.
who were key in the revivals and evangelistic movements of the 19th century.
These were people who were really passionate about sharing the gospel.
They were?
And they weren't afraid to try new methods to reach people, were they?
Not at all. They understood that the gospel message, it remains timeless.
Yeah.
But that the methods we use to share it well, those need to change with the times.
That makes sense.
So they embraced new technologies, new ways to communicate, new approaches to connect with people in a world that was changing really fast.
So Acts 29 was all about innovation,
You know,
about adapting to the times
Sure.
and finding new ways to make the gospel relevant.
exactly.
That's a challenge for all of us today too, isn't it?
It is.
Finding ways to share those timeless truths
Right.
in a way that resonates with people in our culture today.
The big challenge.
But I think the sermon offers us some really valuable insights
It is.
from those who have gone before us, who
Right.
faced similar challenges and figured out ways to overcome them.
Exactly.
But the sermon doesn't stop there, does it?
Okay.
It zooms in on a specific example that I found really moving.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
The missionaries who brought Christianity to Korea in the late 19th century.
Ah, yes. A truly remarkable story.
Courage, sacrifice, cultural sensitivity.
All of it.
I mean, these missionaries left behind everything they knew.
They did their families, their homes, their comfort,
Wow.
to travel to a place that was completely foreign to them.
It must have been so daunting,
It was.
stepping into a culture so different from their own,
Yeah.
facing language barriers, suspicion from the locals.
It was tough.
The sermon really emphasizes the challenges they faced,
Yeah.
the perseverance they showed,
Yes.
and that cultural humility they demonstrated
It's inspiring.
as they tried to share the gospel in this new land.
It really is.
And their Acts 29 wasn't just about preaching.
Right.
It was about building relationships, learning the language, understanding the culture, and really earning the trust of the people they were trying to reach.
It was about meeting people where they were at.
And their efforts weren't wasted, were they?
Not at all.
Christianity took root in Korea.
It did.
It flourished. It became a major force in the country.
It's amazing.
It's a powerful example of how even the smallest seed of faith,
Yeah.
planted in difficult soil can grow into something beautiful.
It's like their Acts 29 became woven into the very fabric of Korean society.
Exactly.
And it reminds us that our own Acts 29,
Yeah.
it might not always look how we expect.
Right.
It might not be about, grand stages or dramatic conversions.
Right.
It might be about those quiet acts of service, those simple conversations.
Right.
Or just being a faithful presence in the lives of those around us.
I love that it's a reminder that faithfulness isn't always about making headlines, you know?
It's not.
It's about showing up every day and doing what you can where you are with what you have.
Exactly.
But the sermon doesn't just leave us with these inspiring examples from history.
It does.
It challenges us to consider what our own Acts 29 might look like.
Right here, right now.
In the here and now.
Yes.
And it brings us back to the present moment,
Well,
to our own lives,
Yeah.
to the unique challenges and opportunities we face.
In a world that can feel pretty overwhelming.
Because the world can feel pretty crazy sometimes.
It can.
It's easy to get caught up in all the headlines and anxieties.
And feel like things are out of control.
Yeah. So how does the sermon encourage us to write our own Acts 29 in the midst of all that?
Well, it starts by reminding us that we're not alone.
Okay.
That same God who empowered Paul,
Yeah.
the reformers,
The revivalists.
and the missionaries.
He's with us today.
He is.
Okay, that's encouraging. But sometimes it feels like God's pretty silent these days.
I understand.
How can we be sure he's still working even when we can't see it?
That's a question a lot of people wrestle with.
It is.
And I think the sermon offers some good insights.
Okay.
It points to the faithfulness of those who came before us.
Okay.
People who faced their own challenges and doubts,
Right.
yet they persevered in their faith.
They did.
And it reminds us that God's ways are not always our ways,
Right.
and his timing is often different from ours.
So even when we can't see the big picture, even when things feel uncertain, we can trust that God is still working, weaving the threads of our lives together into something beautiful and purposeful.
Exactly. And I think that's the essence of this whole Acts 29 challenge.
Right.
It's not about trying to copy what others have done.
Right.
It's about listening to God's voice in our own lives,
Yeah.
discerning his call and stepping out in faith, even when we don't know where he's leading.
So it's about trusting the process even when the path isn't clear.
Exactly. And that's where the sermon gets really personal.
How so?
Well, it challenges us to look at our own lives,
Okay.
our own circumstances, and ask ourselves, what will our chapter add to the story?
Wow.
What legacy will we leave behind?
That's a big question.
It is.
It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can. But the sermon offers us some guidance.
Okay.
It encourages us to start by identifying our unique gifts, passions, and opportunities.
So it's not about trying to be someone we're not.
No, it's not.
It's about embracing who God made us to be
Yes,
and using our strengths to make a difference.
exactly. And it's about being open to the unexpected, to the possibility that God might call us to do things that are outside our comfort zone.
Things that might even seem impossible.
Yes.
That's exciting, but also a little scary.
It can be,
Yeah.
but we don't have to do this alone.
Right.
We have the Holy Spirit to guide us,
That empower us.
to give us courage and wisdom.
So even when we feel inadequate or afraid, we can rely on God's strength.
Absolutely. And that's a really powerful reminder, especially in a world that can feel so chaotic and unpredictable.
It is. Okay, so I'm starting to feel inspired here, but I'm curious to hear more about how this Acts 29 concept has played out in different cultures and contexts throughout history.
Okay.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Absolutely. The sermon takes us on this fascinating journey, exploring how individuals from different backgrounds and different eras have lived out their own Acts 29
Okay.
in ways that are both unique and really inspiring.
Okay. I'm ready to hear more.
One example that really stood out to me was the story of those early Celtic Christians,
Oh, yeah.
particularly in Ireland. You see, during the 5th and 6th centuries, while the Roman Empire was falling apart,
Right.
this vibrant expression of Christianity was taking root on the edges of Europe,
Mm.
far from those centers of power.
So while things were falling apart in Rome, something new was emerging in Ireland.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing what was so unique about Celtic Christianity.
Well, it was deeply rooted in nature.
Okay.
Think like rolling green hills, rugged coastlines, a sense of mystery and enchantment.
I can picture it.
And Celtic monks and missionaries, they embraced this environment.
Okay.
They found ways to connect their faith to the rhythms of nature, to the beauty of creation.
So it wasn't just about, reading the Bible and going to church.
Right.
It was about experiencing God in the world around them.
Exactly. And they weren't afraid to get creative either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they developed their own distinctive artistic styles,
Okay.
incorporating like intricate knotwork and vibrant colors into their manuscripts, crosses, even their architecture.
Oh, yeah. I've seen those Celtic knots.
Oh, yeah.
They're so intricate and beautiful.
They are.
It sounds like they were expressing their faith in a way that was both personal and culturally relevant.
That's a great observation. And it's something the sermon emphasizes, that Acts 29 isn't about conforming to a rigid mold.
Right.
It's about finding ways to express your faith authentically,
Yeah.
using the language and the imagery of your own culture, your own time.
Makes sense. So these Celtic Christians weren't just copying Rome.
Nope.
They were creating something new,
They were.
something that spoke to the people of Ireland.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And they didn't just stay within their own borders either.
Oh, really?
No, they sent missionaries across the sea
Wow.
to Scotland, England, even mainland Europe,
Okay.
spreading the gospel, planting new churches.
So their Acts 29 wasn't just about preserving their own traditions.
Right.
It was about sharing it with the world.
Exactly. And it wasn't always easy either.
I bet.
They faced challenges, opposition, even persecution at times.
Wow.
But their commitment to sharing the love of Christ, their passion for their faith, and their willingness to embrace the unknown,
Yeah.
well, it helped shape the course of Christian history.
It's like they were writing a new chapter in the story of Christianity.
Yeah.
A chapter that was rooted in their own culture, but also universal in its appeal.
And that's the beauty of the whole Acts 29 concept, isn't it?
It is.
It's both deeply personal and globally expansive.
Yeah.
It's about finding your own unique voice, your own way of expressing your faith,
Okay.
but also contributing to something much larger than yourself.
Right.
Something that goes beyond cultural boundaries and historical periods.
Okay, so we've got Paul in Rome, the Protestant reformers, and the Celtic Christians.
Yeah,
These are all pretty big examples of Acts 29.
they are.
But what about those of us who aren't theologians, missionaries, or revolutionaries?
Right.
How does this concept apply to everyday life?
That's a great question, and the sermon addresses that directly.
Okay.
It reminds us that writing our own Acts 29,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be about grand gestures or making headlines.
Okay.
It's about being faithful to our calling, whatever that is,
I see.
and using our unique gifts and opportunities to make a difference.
So it could be something like being a good neighbor, or volunteering in our community,
Excellent.
or raising our kids with good values,
Absolutely.
or even speaking up for what we believe in,
Yeah.
standing up for people who are marginalized,
Yeah.
being a beacon of hope.
All of that.
In a world that often feels dark and cynical,
It does.
it's easy to feel overwhelmed, though, isn't it?
It is.
Like, how can we make a difference when the world seems so broken?
It's a valid feeling, and the sermon acknowledges that,
Okay,
but it also reminds us that we're not in this alone.
right.
We have that same Holy Spirit that empowered everyone who came before us.
Yeah.
The apostles, the reformers, the missionaries.
He's still here.
He is.
So even when we feel small or powerless,
Yes.
we can tap into that power.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real excitement of Acts 29 lies.
Mm.
It's not about relying on our own strength or cleverness.
Okay.
It's about surrendering to God's purpose, letting him work through us,
Right.
and trusting that he can use even our small efforts to accomplish amazing things.
I like the, okay, so we've talked about these big picture examples.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to hear more about how Acts 29 has played out in the lives of everyday people throughout history.
Oh, absolutely.
Are there any specific stories from the sermon that you'd like to share?
The sermon is full of inspiring stories.
Okay, great. I'm ready for a story.
Well, one story that really caught my attention was that of Gladys Aylward.
Gladys Dale, okay.
This British missionary who went to China in the 1930s.
To China. Wow.
And she wasn't a theologian or a speaker or anything like that.
Okay.
Actually, she had been rejected by several missionary societies.
Oh, wow.
Because she didn't have a lot of formal education.
That's pretty discouraging.
It is. But she had this deep conviction that God was calling her to go.
Okay.
So she saved up her money. She was a housemaid. And bought a one-way ticket to China and just took off.
That's a huge leap of faith.
It is. What did she do once she got there?
Yeah, what did she do?
Well, she struggled at first.
I can imagine.
You know, she didn't speak the language. She didn't understand the culture.
Right.
And people were skeptical of her, both the locals and the other missionaries.
That must have been so challenging.
It was, but she was determined to make a difference.
Okay.
So she started learning the language, immersing herself in the culture,
Right.
and earning people's trust.
And eventually she found a way to use her gifts
She did.
to serve the community.
Yeah, so what was her Acts 29?
Yeah, what did she end up doing?
She became a foot inspector.
A fruit inspector.
Yeah, she traveled from village to village,
Wow.
checking for cases of bound feet,
Oh, wow.
which was this really painful practice that was common in China at the time.
That doesn't sound very glamorous.
Maybe not,
Yeah.
but it gave her access to homes and families
Okay.
that would have otherwise been closed to her.
I see.
And as she treated people's feet, she would share stories from the Bible,
Oh, wow.
sing hymns, offer words of hope and encouragement.
That's amazing.
It is, isn't it?
It's like she found a way to connect her faith with her everyday work,
Exactly.
using her skills and her compassion to make a difference.
And she didn't stop there either.
Oh, really?
No, she also became an advocate for orphans,
Wow.
rescuing abandoned children and raising them as her own.
That's incredible.
So she wasn't just talking the talk.
Right.
She was walking the walk, living out her faith in practical and compassionate ways.
Her Acts 29 wasn't about fame or fortune.
No, it wasn't.
It was about serving those in need,
Yes.
sharing God's love,
Yeah.
making a difference in the lives of people who were often overlooked.
Exactly. It's a beautiful story.
It is.
And it reminds us that Acts 29,
Yeah.
it's not about achieving some big goal or becoming famous.
Okay.
It's about following God's leading, using your gifts to serve others,
Right.
and trusting that even your small actions can make a big difference.
Yeah. It's a reminder that faithfulness isn't always flashy.
It's not.
It's about those everyday actions, those small acts of kindness.
Exactly.
So we've heard about Gladys Aylward in China.
Yeah.
Are there any other stories that the sermon highlights?
Oh, there are so many. But one that really struck me was the story of Corrie ten Boom
Corrie ten Boom.
and her family
Okay.
in the Netherlands during World War II.
I've heard of her. She wrote The Hiding Place, right?
That's right.
About how her family hid Jews from the Nazis.
Exactly.
That's a powerful story.
It is a truly incredible example of Acts 29 in action.
Wow.
You know, ordinary people taking huge risks to live out their faith
Yeah.
in the face of unimaginable evil.
So their Acts 29 was about resistance. You know,
It was.
standing up to injustice, putting their lives on the line to protect others.
Exactly, the Ten Boom family. They were devout Christians,
Right.
and they believed it was their duty to help those who were being persecuted,
Even though it was dangerous.
even though it was incredibly dangerous.
And they turned their home into a safe haven,
They did.
hiding Jewish refugees in a secret room behind a false wall.
It's an incredible story.
It is, but it couldn't have been easy. How did they manage to keep it a secret?
It was a constant challenge,
Yeah.
full of danger and uncertainty.
I bet.
They had to be so careful, always on guard,
Wow.
never knowing when the Gestapo might show up.
Scary.
But they were sustained by their faith, their love for their neighbors,
Right.
and their belief that they were doing the right thing,
No matter the cost.
no matter the cost.
So it's like their faith gave them strength that went beyond human capacity.
Absolutely. And their story is a powerful reminder that Acts 29,
Yeah.
it's not always about comfort or convenience.
Right.
Sometimes it's about taking a stand even when it's risky,
Yeah.
and trusting that God will give you the strength to do what needs to be done.
So even in the darkest of times,
Yeah.
even when facing true evil,
Huh.
we can still choose to be a light in the darkness. We can still choose to live out our faith in a way that makes a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the Ten Boom family story so inspiring.
It is.
It shows that even in the middle of a war,
Right.
surrounded by so much hatred and violence,
Yeah.
you can still choose to act with love, compassion, and courage.
It's a powerful reminder that our actions matter. You know?
They do.
Even small acts of kindness and resistance can have a huge impact.
They can. And I think it also speaks to a broader theme that the sermon is emphasizing,
What's that?
that Acts 29.
Yeah.
It's not just about adding to the story of Christianity,
Okay.
It's about shaping the present moment, about making a real difference in the world around us.
So it's not just about preserving the past, it's about creating a better future.
Exactly. It's about using your faith to make a difference in the here and now,
Right.
to bring hope and healing to a world that really needs it.
I like that. Okay, so we've heard about Gladys Aylward in China
Yeah.
and Corrie ten Boom in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Both incredible women who faced huge challenges
I did.
and found amazing ways to live out their faith.
Yes.
Are there any other Acts 29 stories in the sermon?
Oh, absolutely. The sermon draws inspiration from all sorts of people and movements throughout history.
Okay.
But one that I thought was really relevant to what's going on in the world today is the story of the civil rights movement in the United States.
Oh, wow. Okay, the civil rights movement?
Yes,
Yeah.
in the 1950s and 60s.
Okay, what does the civil rights movement have to do with Acts 29?
Well, the sermon points out how that fight for racial justice,
Yeah.
it was deeply rooted in Christian principles,
Okay.
like equality, dignity, and love.
Right.
And many of the key leaders of the movement,
Yeah.
like Martin Luther King Jr.,
Okay.
they were pastors and preachers
Right.
who drew their inspiration from the Bible and their faith.
So they saw their activism as part of their faith.
Exactly. They believed that fighting for justice was a way of living out the gospel.
And they saw the injustices of segregation and discrimination as like a violation of God's will.
They did. They saw it as a denial of the inherent worth of every human being.
And they felt that it was their duty as Christians to speak out against these things.
Exactly, and to work for a more just and equal society.
That's a really powerful connection.
It is.
It's like they were writing a new chapter in the story of Christianity.
Yeah.
A chapter that was about challenging the status quo, confronting injustice,
Right.
building a more inclusive and compassionate world.
Exactly. And it wasn't easy either.
I bet.
They faced fierce opposition violence, even death threats.
Wow.
But they were sustained by their faith, their belief in the power of love,
Right.
and their conviction that God was on their side.
And their faith gave them this incredible courage.
It did a courage the world couldn't understand.
And it's a reminder that Acts 29 isn't just about personal piety or spiritual growth.
No, it's not.
It's about getting involved in the world around us, confronting the injustices of our time, working to create a society that reflects God's love and justice.
Exactly. So it's about being salt and light,
Right.
standing up for what's right, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And I think that's a challenge for us today.
It is.
To look at the injustices in our own world and ask, what can we do to make a difference?
It can feel overwhelming, can't it?
It can, especially when there's so much pain and suffering out there.
But the sermon does offer us hope.
It does.
It reminds us that we're not alone in this fight.
That's right.
We have the legacy of those who came before us,
Yeah.
who faced their own challenges and found ways to make a difference.
And we can draw inspiration from their courage, their perseverance, and their belief in the power of love.
And we can tap into the same power that sustained them, the power of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
So even when we feel small or powerless, we can still contribute to writing a new chapter in this story of faith and justice.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so beautiful about Acts 29. It's a call to action.
An invitation to join in God's work.
To use our gifts to make a difference.
Yes,
And to trust that even our small efforts can have a ripple effect.
exactly.
Okay, so we've explored how Acts 29 has played out in different cultures and different times.
We have.
From Paul in Rome to the Celtic Christians to Gladys Aylward to Corrie ten Boom, even the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
These are all such inspiring examples.
They are.
But I want to hear more about how this concept is relevant to us today.
Okay.
What are some ways that we can write our own Acts 29 in the 21st century?
That's a great question, and the sermon offers some helpful guidance.
Okay.
It challenges us to look at the world around us,
Right.
at the things that matter most to us,
Okay.
and ask, where is God calling me to make a difference?
So we need to pay attention to what's happening around us
Yeah,
and be sensitive to the needs of our community and the world.
exactly, but it can be overwhelming,
The world is a big place.
It is, and there's so many problems.
How do we even know where to start?
Well, the sermon acknowledges that feeling,
Okay.
but it reminds us that we don't have to do everything.
Right.
We just have to do something.
So it's not about trying to save the world all by ourselves.
No, it's not.
It's about finding our own little piece to contribute.
Exactly, and that might be volunteering at a soup kitchen or mentoring a young person,
Okay.
advocating for a cause you care about, or just being kind and compassionate to the people around you.
I like that it's about recognizing that even small things can make a difference. And we're not alone in this, are we?
We're not.
We have the support of our community, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and the legacy of those who came before us.
Exactly. So we're part of a much bigger story.
Yeah.
A story that's been going on for centuries.
Right.
A story that's still being written.
And we each have a role to play.
We do.
No matter how small it might seem.
It doesn't matter how small it seems.
And that's what makes this Acts 29 concept so exciting.
It is.
It's a reminder that we're not just watching history happen. We're part of it.
We're helping to shape the future.
We're co-authors of this story of faith, hope, and love.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. It makes you want to go out and make a difference, you know?
Yeah.
Live with purpose, leave a legacy.
Then do it. The world is waiting for your Acts 29.
Yeah, that is a powerful question. It really makes you think, and honestly, a little daunting, too.
It is, but in a good way.
Yeah, I think so. It pushes us to think bigger, you know? Beyond ourselves.
Oh.
Beyond just our own little world.
Exactly. It reminds us that our lives aren't just about, our own goals and desires.
Right.
We're part of something so much bigger.
A story that's been unfolding for centuries.
And a story that we're still writing.
And the sermon makes it clear that Acts 29 isn't some abstract idea.
Right.
It's about real people doing real things.
Exactly. Making a difference.
Making a tangible difference in the world.
Yeah. It's about taking our faith and putting it into action.
Living out our beliefs in a way that impacts our families, our communities, even the world.
It's not just about going to church or reading our Bibles.
Right. It's about letting those truths shape the way we live.
Exactly how we treat others, how we see the world.
And the sermon gives some practical examples of what that might look like today.
It does.
Okay, I'm listening. What are some concrete ways we can write our own Acts 29 today?
Well, it talks about speaking up for those who are marginalized.
Okay.
Using our voices to advocate for those who can't speak for themselves.
In a world where injustice and inequality are still so prevalent.
Yeah, we have a responsibility to use our platforms to speak out.
To challenge those systems of oppression.
To work towards a more just world.
That's powerful. But it can be intimidating,
Yeah.
Especially today when things can get so heated so easily.
Yeah.
How do we have these conversations without alienating people or getting sucked into all the negativity?
That's a really good question. And the sermon acknowledges those challenges.
Okay.
But it also encourages us to approach those conversations with humility, grace, and a willingness to listen to other viewpoints.
So it's not about winning an argument.
No, it's not.
It's about dialogue.
About seeking understanding.
Building bridges instead of walls.
And remembering that we're all on this journey together.
Right, and we're all at different stages of understanding.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking up for justice, that's one way to write our Acts 29.
It is.
What are some other ways?
Well, the sermon also talks about serving others in practical ways.
Oh, okay.
Remembering that the gospel is about action. Yeah. About meeting needs, about showing compassion to those who are hurting.
So it could be something like volunteering at a soup kitchen, donating to a charity.
Yeah.
Just being there for a friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this grand gesture.
Right.
It can be something small, something that fits into your daily life.
Right.
The point is to be intentional about using what you have to make a difference.
I like that. It makes Acts 29 feel more manageable. It's not about being some kind of superhero.
It's about showing up.
In the everyday moments.
And doing what you can.
With what you have.
And I think that's what makes this so powerful.
Yeah.
It empowers us to see our lives as opportunities.
To make a difference.
And to trust that God can use our small acts of faith to do great things.
Okay, so we've talked about speaking up and serving others.
Uh-huh.
Are there other ways the sermon encourages us to write our own Acts 29?
Yes. It also talks about being a beacon of hope.
Oh, that's important.
Especially in a world that can feel so negative.
It's hard sometimes to stay positive.
It is. But how do we cultivate hope?
Right. How do we even do that, let alone share it with others?
Well, it starts with remembering that even in the darkest of times, God is still at work.
Okay.
His love is still present. His grace is still there. His promises are still true.
And when we hold on to that truth, when we let that shape how we see things and what we do, we become carriers of hope. So it's not about pretending everything is perfect.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the darkness, but choosing to focus on the light.
On the possibility of something better.
Right. And that might involve encouraging someone who's down.
It might.
Or helping someone in need.
Yeah.
Or just choosing to focus on the good things even when times are hard.
Exactly.
Those are all good ways to bring hope into the world. And hope's contagious, right?
It is.
When we're hopeful, when we're kind, it affects the people around
It
us.
creates this ripple effect.
Okay, so we've talked about speaking up for justice, serving others, and being hopeful.
We have.
All great ways to write our own Acts 29.
They are.
But I'm curious, what about the inner work?
Yes.
The character development, the spiritual growth?
That's crucial.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the doing,
It is.
the actions, the accomplishments. But
Yeah.
what about who we are becoming?
Exactly. The sermon emphasizes that Acts 29 is also about internal transformation, about becoming more like Christ, cultivating those fruits of the Spirit.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control.
All of them.
So it's about aligning our hearts and minds with God,
Yes.
letting him shape our character.
Exactly. And that takes time,
Yeah.
Spending time in prayer, reading the Bible, being part of a community that helps us grow,
Right, being intentional about our relationship with God.
and letting his love change us from the inside out.
That's so important because ultimately our actions come from who we are, right?
They do.
If we're not rooted in Christ,
Yeah.
if we're not letting him change us,
Our efforts won't last.
it's like building a house on sand.
Exactly. It might look good for a while, but it won't stand the test of time.
But when we build our lives on Christ,
Yeah.
when we let his love change us,
Our actions become genuine,
authentic,
have a lasting impact.
and that brings us back to the core of Acts 29.
It does.
It's not about earning God's love or proving ourselves. It's about responding to the grace he's already given us, embracing the new life we have in him.
And living in a way that shows his love to the world.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the history of Acts 29.
Yeah.
We've looked at how it's played out in different times and places. And we've discussed ways we can write our own Acts 29 today.
We have.
As we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add?
Just remember, Acts 29 isn't a finish line. It's a journey.
It's not about reaching a goal or becoming some kind of spiritual superstar.
Right? It's about following God's lead step by step.
And trusting that he'll use our efforts to do his work.
Even our imperfect efforts.
And we don't have to do it alone.
We don't. We have our community, the Holy Spirit, and all those who came before us.
We're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Much bigger.
Something that's shaping the world in ways we can't even imagine.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It is. It makes you want to go out and do something. Yeah.
And go for it. The world needs your Acts 29.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been great talking with you.
We hope you've been inspired to write your own chapter in this amazing story of faith, hope, and love.
What will your Acts 29 look like?
It's something to think about as you go about your day.